All right, well, let me say again, now that we have a full house, happy Father's Day to the dads in here. If you are a dad or a granddad or even a great-granddad, would you just stand up for a moment? We would love to recognize you and honor you. And since you're very embarrassed, you can sit down quickly. It's okay, I won't make you stand up. Man, we're thankful for our dads. We want to honor them today. And so I just want to publicly do that. And, in this room, I understand that this is a day that in honoring them, we are going to testify a lot today to the impact and the privilege of fatherhood, the influence of fatherhood. But I also know today that being Father's Day is not necessarily an easy day for everyone at the same time, right? There are those of us in this room who have lost our father. Father's not with us anymore. There are those of us in this room who want to be a dad, and we're not right now. There are those of us in this room who the picture of dad is a painful one. And so Father's Day is not a happy day. It's not a day you have a great phone call or a great dinner or a great conversation. It's a day full of tears and what ifs. And so, man, we just want to lean into that today. I think the good news is that the Bible is going to speak to you today, if that is you. So I'm thankful for that. And would you lean in with me and turn in your Bible to Matthew chapter 6. We're going to be in verses 9 through 13. If you don't have a Bible, we have free ones back there, and we'd love for you to grab one. If you don't know where Matthew is, you're unfamiliar with the Bible, that's okay. It's about probably 3/4 of the way through the book. The first book in the New Testament. And we're going to spend 8 weeks in 5 verses. Yeah, that's right. Normally we go verse by verse through an entire book. We just finished Jonah. And this fall we're going to go through the book of Acts. But right now in the summer we're going to downshift a bit and go literally phrase by phrase through the Lord's Prayer. We're going to marinate in the words of Jesus. And the whole point is that your prayer life and therefore your life as a whole would be forever altered and enhanced. Maybe this summer is the summer that you learn how to pray. How many of you guys in here today want to pray more or learn how to pray better? Go ahead. If you want to, you might say, man, I know how to pray, but I want to pray more robustly, right? Or I want to pray more consistently, or I want to pray without distraction. Or maybe if I want to pray for the first time. It's just so unfamiliar and weird. It's like an awkward family reunion, I just don't even know how to do it, right? Maybe, just maybe, then this is your summer to be able to learn how to meet with him and hear his voice and listen and pour your heart out to him and leave times of prayer like you would leave a lunch with your best friend, only better. Maybe as I ask if you want to learn how to pray, if you were honest with yourself and your heart, the answer is really no. I don't feel a lot of motivation and desire to learn how to grow in prayer. And if that's you, that's okay that's where you're at. It's okay to not be okay. We need to acknowledge that it's a diagnostic on your dashboard and you need to pay attention and go, hey, why is that? Why do I not want to talk to God? Maybe actually what we're going to talk about this morning is going to uncover some of the reasons why you don't actually want to pray. Prayer is very simple. I'm just going to define it for us this way. It's not a difficult theological concept. It's very basic. Prayer is conversation with God. It is so simple. It is connecting. It is communicating. It is the essence of every good relationship, right? That's all it is the exchange of a relationship. One theologian just made it really simple. He called it paying attention to God. That's what prayer is. Being attentive to God. And like most basic things, it's just vital for existence, right? Like breathing, like drinking. To have a branch connected to the trunk where the flow of the source of life is coming, that's what prayer is. And that's maybe why it answers in your life, if prayer is not a part of your life, why there's a lot of confusion in your life, or why there's roller coasters in your life emotionally, or why there's just a flatness and indifference and apathy in your life. Maybe it's because this vital piece is missing. And so we're stepping into a passage where the disciples, the followers of Jesus, not learned men, not educated men, not religious scholars, ordinary dudes step up to the master and say, Lord, teach us to pray. Help us to pray. We want to learn. And you know what? Jesus is so gracious. He acquiesces. He actually is going to answer it for them. See, if you're not praying in your life, Jesus is not looking at you going, what the heck? What's your problem? Get it together. He's so compassionate. He's going to draw near to you and go, hey, let me teach you. Would you pull up a chair the next 8 weeks and ask Jesus to teach you how to pray? Maybe you have a prayer life that is vibrant already. It's fervent, and the next 8 weeks for you, you're just going to be gas on the fire. And the Lord's going to show you more about your role to pray and intercede for others, and maybe to help others in our church community learn how to pray. Great. Maybe prayer is something that you're practicing, you're doing, but it's inconsistent, right? And the next 8 weeks are going to really challenge you and stretch you and work you out a little bit to take a next step in learning how to pray. Maybe, again, prayer is just absent in your life. Or it's scary and it's an intimidating thing. And so maybe the next 8 weeks are just laying a foundation, and it's going to be groundbreaking stuff for you to step into prayer. That's what I hear from a lot of people. I'm afraid to pray. I'm unsure. I just don't know how to do it. Great. Lean in the next 8 weeks. Jesus is going to teach you if you would ask. So what if the summer of 2019 was game-changing for you spiritually? Were you going to learn how to pray and everything clicks? That's our whole goal. That's why we're doing this series, that you would be able at the end to go, man, I'm not only inspired to pray, but I actually have learned how to do it. I'm not only motivated at a heart level and I want to do it, I actually practically now know kind of some pieces to the puzzle of how to do it, and it's less uncomfortable. And then we're going to actually walk it out. That's the ultimate goal, is that you would practice it. Practice it in your gospel community. Practice it in our member meeting. Y'all know we put a lot of effort and investment into those prayer guides back there. The whole point is for you to actually use it. It's free. Take it. Journal in it. Go through it. The different types of prayer. We want you to just mark that sucker up as you begin to flesh this out practically. So the next 2 months, the next 7 phrases, we're going to see a prayer that's nothing short of revolutionary. It's in fact the most revolutionary prayer that's ever been uttered. These 7 phrases have literally turned the world upside down. And they can turn your world upside down, again, if you lean in, starting with a couple simple words today. So Matthew chapter 6, as we plunge in, I need to get us into the context just briefly, what we're looking at. So verse 5, let's start right there. Jesus begins to pull his disciples aside, and he's preaching now very specifically to those who would follow him. And when you pray, you must not pray like the hypocrites. Hypocrites is a word for actor, right? It's to fake, it's to pretend. Don't be like these Jewish religious leaders who are hypocrites, for they love to stand and pray in the synagogues and in the street corners, that they may be what? Seen. They may be seen by others. So for some people, prayer is all about being seen, man. They want to jockey for position. They're trying to make the varsity team of Christianity, right? And prayer is like social currency. If I can do this and do it well and let others know how well I'm doing it, then it ups my status. It ups my game. I'm seen as the holy guy, the holy woman. I like how it makes me feel. And so I do this religious ritual for the benefit it brings me. It's really just a self-seeking show. But also, verse 7, don't pray like the Gentiles, he's going to say, which are people who don't know God, and they're praying to their different deities, to their different little g gods. And when you pray, do not heap up empty phrases as these people do, for they think that they will be heard for their many words. So that their babble, their repetitions of phrases are like grasping for some out there deity, out there God to maybe hear them and grant them their wish and what they need. And so they're just throwing stuff out. It is wishful thinking. There's no substance. There's nothing there's no actual God on the back side of it. It's kind of like a magical power. And if they can just recite this and say this incantation enough or perfect or in the right timing or facing the right direction, then maybe that God will respond. That's what prayer is like. We see the same categories in 2019, actually. We see people who are doing it for the game. They got all the fancy words and the lingo, and they know what to do, and they really like the attention it brings. And we got other people who, man, they're just kind of like, sending good thoughts and just kind of like hoping and hope in general. And if I say these good things, and if I turn to God like a genie, maybe in my time of need, maybe he'll show up, but there's no real concrete substance there. And so Jesus is saying, hey, prayer is not about looking to be seen, and prayer is not about wishing to be heard. Both of those things are not what it's about. What is it about? Instead, pray like this, verse 9. When he says pray then like this, I want to point out that word like is really important. Many of us who have a background in church maybe memorized the Lord's Prayer growing up. Anybody in a church background like said the Lord's Prayer every week at church? I was in one of those. And so it was like burned in there, right? Like you just recite this, or maybe you recite it at a meal or something like that. So you've said it hundreds of times, and it has a way of becoming a ritualistic. But listen, the Lord's Prayer is not like a Nintendo code. Okay, you guys remember that? Up, down, A, B, B, A, select, and like, boom, Donkey Kong could fly now, right? That was awesome. I love those things. That's not what the Lord's Prayer is. If I just weave this in and mechanically say it like a formula, boom, I get what I want, forgiven, and we're good, right? No, that's not what's going on. Pray then like this. See, that's incantation, but we're after conversation. And so what Jesus is saying is pray like this. Here's a matrix. Here's a paradigm. Here's a launching pad for you to explore the world of prayer through. That's what he's going to teach us. And there's going to be 6 petitions, 6 requests in this prayer. But before we get to that, Jesus starts with who we're talking to in the first place. And it's the most earth-shaking part of the whole thing. Pray then like this, our Father. Wow. Jesus is going to address God in a prayer. Think about this. That's going to be cemented for all time, remembered and rehearsed and repeated for all time. Like Jesus has one shot to get God's title right? To get the right term, to get the right word that's going to capture all the essence of who God is. And what does he say? He doesn't use Almighty, right? He doesn't use Most High God. He doesn't use Holy Creator. He doesn't use Master or Lord. Of all the designations that Jesus could have given to God to summarize who he is to finite, sinful, created beings, how we're supposed to approach God, what does he say? Father. That's crazy to me. Jesus said, I'm going to distill all that God is for you down into a single term by which you can approach him and address him. And what is it? Dad. Now, I'm saying it like this because I'm trying to get us into the world that we should be in. This is shocking. Shocking. And the disciples would have understood how shocking this is. They would have gasped when they heard this. How many of you guys woke up this week from the thunder in the middle of the night, like the last, 4 straight nights or something, right? We're sleeping, 3 a.m. comes around and boom, right? And you're like popping right off. Man, that's what this would have hit them like. Would have jolted them. Whoa, what did he say? Father? Isn't that like in the Old Testament? Yes, some. There's a handful of times God is referred to as Father, but it's always high level, macro way, like Father of the nation. It's not like my Father, personal, intimate, I'm going to address. No. Like for Jesus to show up on the scene and call him Father right here is like, that's dangerous in a way. In Mark 14, he's going to move into totally uncharted territory, and he calls him in the midst of his sorrow the night before he dies, Abba, which in the Aramaic means daddy, dad. That's what a little 1-year-old would call their dad, Abba. Abba. That's downright scandalous to a Jew. It is provocative. It's exactly why the Pharisees want to kill Jesus. You're claiming God is your father? Right? It's inconceivable. What do you call God? When you pray, what do you call him? What are the terms you use? Do you say, oh God? Do you say, Lord? Do you say, mighty King of hosts? What do you say when you're talking about God? More importantly, what do you functionally operate as? When you talk to God, do you view him as a principle? Okay? You need to behave well, stay out of his way, wave and smile from a distance. I don't want to get detention. Do you approach God? Do you view him like a proctor of a test? Okay, I've got to get all this knowledge in. I got to retain. I got to study hard. So the exam's coming, and I got to be able to pass it and graduate to the next spiritual grade. He's going to mark it up. Do you view God as a boss? You really try to get in good graces with him because they have all the power to hire you, fire you, promote you, and give you vacation. Right? So I really want to be seen. Oh, he's looking, better nail this, okay? What is God to you? Is he a dignitary? You don't really know him, but he's some worthy of respect figure, so you salute, call him sir, and move on? Is he a genie? Is he a harsh drill sergeant? Is he a judge? What is your concept of him? What do you know God as? Maybe you call him Father, but when you call him Father, for you, it's not really personal or genuine. It just kind of comes out because you've grown up in church. That's what you do. It's like second nature, autopilot, just like filling up your glass of water from the fridge. You just do it without even thinking about it. Calling him Dad is like putting on white socks. It's just plain and ordinary and everyday. You don't really grasp the baffling beauty of it. Is that maybe what Father's like? It should be astonishing to us. Some of us call him Father, but man, we don't know him as Father. There's a difference. We don't know him as Father. We don't know real relationship. We don't know real emotional connection and depth. We don't have any shared memories with God as Father that created a bond. We don't know safety and vulnerability, what it's like to approach him, be able to bare your soul and tell him everything, and him accept you. We don't know provision and generosity. You don't know his protection and how he uses his authority to protect and to serve. You don't know, you haven't felt his wisdom and his affection and his pride over you, celebrating growth in you. You haven't experienced his faithful, committed, self-sacrificing kind of love. All the things I just described are things that a father is meant to be. That's what a father should be, but you haven't necessarily known God as that. And maybe, and this is where I want to spend some time this morning, maybe the reason for that is because you don't know your earthly dad like that. You didn't experience that with your earthly dad. Oh, here we go, Tyler. Getting into my past, going to pull up some psychology stuff. We're getting into our daddy wounds. Yeah, we are, okay? We are going to do that a little bit because it's extremely significant and affects how you view God. I think all of us have some degree or another, whether we had great and amazing dads growing up or whether we've had some total failures of fathers. We have some distorted views. Maybe when I say father, this is why it's hard for you to know God as Father, because you hear father and you smell the stench of alcohol. Or you feel the sting of a swat. Or you don't feel anything because he wasn't there. And so maybe just to help us a little bit, I'm going to categorize some different types of fathers. Maybe this is going to evoke some things in you, and I think it probably should. This is good. Lean in and ask the Lord to maybe identify some things that you experienced and how that's affecting your view of him as God. The first distorted view of a father, I would say, would be an abusive father. One who's angry and controlling. Maybe you grew up afraid of dad, right? You had to walk on eggshells around him. Oh, dad's around. Don't take him off. Maybe dad was violent and maybe even violated you. He was manipulative. And so if you had an abusive father, then it's difficult to see God as safe and as secure and as comforting. Maybe your dad, number 2, was aloof. He was just cold and distant, right? Like, he was there, but there's no emotions, no expression. Like, you would share things, you just got head nods. Like, he really didn't know how to identify with your pain or your joy. There was no sharing in that. Maybe your dad was like a cerebral kind of guy, or maybe he was just like hard and stoic. And so you just didn't get any of that, and he kind of came across as uninterested. Maybe he thought, they just know that I love them, and that was assumed. That's you. Maybe then it's going to be difficult seeing God as affectionate, God as compassionate, God as understanding and engaged. Number 3, authoritarian. Some of our dads were extremely strict, right? And they kind of overruled us with power. They handed out the do's and don'ts. And so if you had a desire, they kind of would squash it because it was all about their way or the highway. And they had a way of just lording that over, kind of throwing their weight around. Yes, sir, is what you think of with dad. I better obey. And so you have a difficult time seeing God as joyful, seeing God as sacrificial. 4th, maybe your dad was, anemic. I had to go with the A's, okay? I just had to keep it going for us, all right? That's how it works. Anemic. Like, what? Is that an iron deficiency? No. I mean that he wasn't a strong leader. He was weak. He was passive. Rather than being a visionary and leading your family, he was always reactive. He made poor decisions and he put your family in hard situations. Or when he needed to stand up and defend you, he stayed in the background and cowered. Maybe he was lazy. And if that's the case, then you maybe have a difficult time seeing God as a strong leader and a king who's worth following and respecting. Number 5, absent. Dad wasn't present, right? He was distant. He was abandoned. Maybe he left, or maybe he was there, but he wasn't there. When he came home, he checked out, and it was onto the garage, or it was onto TV, or it was onto his hobby. Do you know over 50% of kids tonight in America will go to sleep in a home without dad? Just let that sink in a little bit. That was me. And I know what it's like to wonder that and to feel those voids of hurt and pain from that. And when that happens, it's difficult sometimes to see God as present, to see God as personal, to see God as faithful and as interested. Number 6, accusing. Maybe your dad was critical, right? Like, oh, he says, I love you, but then it was like everything you did was under the microscope. He was judging it. He was pointing out your failures, right? It was maybe it's because I love you and I want you to be the best you can be, but it was just constantly where you were wrong, and there was zero affirmation ever, right? Nothing is ever good enough. And so your idea of dad is, I got to perform, man. I better get it right. Okay? And if that's you, you have a difficult time seeing God as accepting, God as gracious, and God as for you. So, man, I know some of you in this room and where you're at. I know some of your stories with your dads, but I don't know everyone. But I know in a room this size, we're going to be all over the map on those. And maybe some of us have multiple of those that have kind of mixed in and kind of tainted and projected our view onto God, right? I know some of you maybe still live with your dad. Some of you talk to your dad every day. Some of you have never even met your dad. Some of you ran up into his lap the moment you got home. Some of you ran into your room the moment he got home. Some of you can call your dad today and confess sins and pray together. Some of you have never been able to talk about Jesus with your dad. Like, we're all over the map in this room, right? And no matter how good your dad was, and man, this is Father's Day, we want to celebrate our dads, and we want to honor them, but at the same time, we need to see, man, that the inescapability of their impact on you, right? Whether it was just tiny ways they didn't reflect God, or whether it was gaping holes, God has set this up to where our earthly fathers would have immense impact on who we are and how we see him. This isn't just another relationship. It shapes you, man, and it wounds you like no other relationship. And that is no disrespect or no devaluing to the impact of a mother. There's just something about how God has designed us and hardwired us to look to our dad to bring us identity and to clarify identity. It's why we had foster kids live with us growing up and different extended family members growing up. And it's why that a kid can have a dad who's an absolute bum, and yet they won't stop loving him and looking to him and defending him to other people, right? Why? Because we are craving this acceptance in our dad. We want our dads to be this man who embodies what we're supposed to be, who tells me who I am, who gives me security, who gives me love. And so we're watching and we're waiting and we're wondering, asking these questions from our dad. The impact is inescapable. It's why Luke Skywalker was rocked when he learned who dad was, right? He couldn't shake it. You guys know I've never seen Star Wars, so you're like, man, don't even try. I feel the judgment already from you guys. Oh, man. God has designed us as fathers to image him, and the opportunity we have as dads to do that. To draw near to a little heart and a little soul and to show them glimpses of who God the Father is, who has fashioned them. And so, yes, we're going to celebrate the things in our dads that have been good and that have done that, but we've got to remember every earthly dad has missed the mark. Hey, listen, why? Because they're not God. Our dads were made to image God, but not to be God. That's so important. It's so important. How many of you guys have ever done those wine painting things? Yeah, like, well, I don't know, sip and stroke, whatever they call them. Is that not what they call them? That's what they should call them, all right? Yeah, okay, so here's the deal, right? You show up, it's like, okay, you're going to paint Starry Night. Cool. By the end of it, it's like, okay, yeah, I mean, that's cute, right? That's cute. Good effort. Like I see a glimpse of it, but okay, you're no Van Gogh. Okay? Van No. Right? That's where we're going. Dad jokes are abounding today. Sorry, it's Father's Day. So this is a copy, and it's a pretty bad copy, but I still get the idea, okay? But it's not the original. It's not the original. It's not the perfect, beautiful portrait. And so dads, like, for one, if you're a dad, this should make the pressure come off, okay? You're not made to be dad. You're made to image God. Thanks the Lord. Great, because I'm going to screw up. We talked about how we're screwed up from our dads. I'm going to do it to my kids, okay? And yet, it also gives us an idea of how we should look at our earthly dads with such compassion. No matter how much they mess up, listen, your dad did the best with what he had. And the poor portrait probably that he saw of dad and where he was at with the Lord and his sin and his brokenness. And so we can enter into that. Now, I'm not excusing sin, and I'm not minimizing sin and abuse. I'm just saying it allows us to have a little more compassion on our dads, right? So we need to do that. But here's where we're going. In steps, as we turn to the New Testament, the Father, the image, the portrait, the right original painting. I want to turn to Ephesians 3:14. Here's what it says. For this reason, Paul says, I kneel before the Father. The Father. Verse 15, the Father from whom all families are named, and really it's the same word. He's going pater in both places. And so in John Stott says it this way, before the Father of all fatherhood. I kneel before the Father of all fatherhood. He is the Father. He is the image, the imprint of what fatherhood is supposed to be, right? We got glimpses in the Old Testament. We flipped the pages, and now the New Testament has exploded onto the scene with Jesus 170 times in the gospel calling God Father. Like, he's making it explicit, right? He doesn't want us to miss this. In the Sermon on the Mount where we're at right now, 17 times alone, hey, do you get this? God is your Father. That's the whole point of the sermon. This is a family manifesto. This is what life should look like with people who have God as their Father. You can't miss it. Jesus is kind of pulling back the curtain, if you will, and he's inviting us into the intimacy of his relationship with God, and he's like, hey, this is what my dad is like. Stroke by stroke, he's repainting the canvas of fatherhood to us. Here's what God is like. He's engaged, not aloof. He's not after empty rule following to make himself look better or just to make things easier. No, he's after your heart. He uses his authority not to abuse and to harm, but to protect and to serve. He doesn't fly off in anger or bottle up his emotions. He's perfectly healthy and regulated in all his emotions. They are righteous. He is totally trustworthy. He's safe to refuge in with all your anxieties, all your fears, all your weaknesses. Oh, he's a warrior who is tough for you, but he's tender with you. And at the same time, he doesn't lack the courage to discipline you because he's after your good. This is our Father. He's perfect. He'll comfort you through suffering. He'll empower you to endure it. He's fully present. He's never absent. He's always wise. And man, he's the strongest leader you'll ever follow. And every single thing he does for you is a sacrificial act of absolute love. This is our Father. Maybe you don't know a Father like that. This is the one you were meant to know. Jesus won't let us miss it. He says, you want to know God, you must know him as Father. Maybe some of you today are going, how can I know him as Father? I get why Jesus can. He's holy, sinless, righteous. Yeah, he can call God Father, but me, I can't call God Father. Like, I'm messed up. I don't deserve this kind of fatherhood. That's great for other people, but like not me. And so you're kind of like the prodigal son. You're like, I'm unworthy to be called your son. That's what maybe you feel and say. The shame and the guilt that's heaped upon you. Well, let's look at that story for just a moment because Jesus wants to communicate about his dad in that story. Look at what the father does. As the prodigal comes home, the father is scanning the horizon looking for his son. He sees him and he hikes up his robe. All his dignity, he hikes up his little skirt and he goes sprinting after his son. And he gets to him before his son gets a word out. What does he do? He wraps him up with a hug. He begins to shower him with kisses, like embarrassingly, like your mom does, right? And he just goes after it. And then the son musters up his little speech. Forgive me. I'm unworthy to be called your son. Just hire me on as a servant. And what does God do? God speaks to every single one. Each of those three things the son says, where he says, forgive me. He clothes him up in his robe. He covers his shame. He says, you're forgiven. All the dirt, you're clean. I'm unworthy to be called your son. Here's the signet ring of our family. You're restored back in, son. Just hire me on as a paid slave. Here's some shoes for your feet. Slaves don't get shoes. Free people do. You're free. You're forgiven, you're family, and you're free. That's what the Father does and says in that moment. And then, I'm going to keep the F's going. He fiestas, okay? He has fun, man. They feast. They get after it in the house. Like, our God knows how to party. How awesome is that? Like, he created laughter. He created joy. This is our Father. Man, herein lies the incomparable message of Christianity. God can be your Father. John 1:12. But to all who did receive him, receive Jesus, who believed in Jesus' name, he gave the right to become children of God. He's offered that privilege. He's given that right. When Jesus says our Father, it's on purpose. He doesn't say my Father. And you might say, well, that's because it's communal. He wanted us to pray all together. That's right. And we'll see that pronoun us throughout the passage. But I think, even more so, because he doesn't want you to read this prayer and go, well, Jesus can call God Father, but not me. Jesus is extending his Father's fatherhood to you. That's crazy, right? He wants to make sure there's no mistake. This privilege of God's fatherhood applies to you. Well, how? How can you say that? Well, that's the gospel. Through the death of Jesus. We're going to celebrate that in a minute. If you're a believer, you've entrusted yourself to Jesus and you've called him Father, then you're going to come up in a minute while we're singing and take this bread and dip it in this cup and remember the fact that Jesus calls God Father 21 times in his prayers in the Gospels, but one time he doesn't call him Father. Do you remember when? His last words on the cross. My God, why have you forsaken me? He didn't call him Dad so that we might call him Dad. He temporarily experienced the loss of his fatherhood so that we might permanently experience the gain of his fatherhood. That's what happens. That's the gospel right here. That we get God as our Father because Christ is our brother. That's what Hebrews 2 says, that he's going to bring many sons to glory and that he is not ashamed to call us brother or sister. Jesus isn't ashamed to call you brother or sister. It's amazing. The beloved Son, the one in whom God is well pleased, gets transferred onto us. You don't have to earn it. It's not because you performed your way into it. You were adopted by grace. This is adoption is what we're talking about. And we remember this up here because we remember that adoption is costly. Am I right? Costly. There's cost. If you've adopted, you know there's a lot that goes into that process, and it's not cheap. It's not inexpensive. But it is real, and it is permanent. Galatians 4, I want to read for us as we begin to wrap up. Galatians 4, beginning verse 3. In the same way, we also, when we were children, were enslaved to the elementary principles of the world. So he's saying we were slaves to sin. Our father, in a sense, was sin, you could say. Verse 4, but when the fullness of time had come, God sent forth his Son, Jesus, born of a woman, born under the law, to redeem, to buy out of slavery those who were under the law, so that we might receive, there it is, adoption as sons. Adoption as sons. Now keep going, because here we get into the privilege of adoption. And because you're sons, because you're daughters, God has sent his Spirit into our hearts, crying what? There it is. Daddy, Abba, Father. So you're no longer a slave, but you are a son, you're a daughter. And if a son and daughter, then an heir through God. I want to ask you today, do you know the spirit of adoption? Do you know what it's like to cry out from your soul, Daddy? Do you sing to God like he's your dad? Do you know the safety of unveiling your emotions to him as Father? Do you know the joy that delights in him as Father, the freedom that approaches him as Father, the passion for others to know him as Father, the comfort that's felt by him as Father, the trust that relies on him and depends upon him as Father? Have you experienced this? It's a legal transaction, but it's not just a truth that gets spoken over you. It's a reality inwardly that now drives your life. I'm adopted. I got a dad. I belong to him. I'm owned by him. Do you know that? Have you felt that? Can you say, yes, I know what that's like to experience Dad? If you don't, you'll never know how to pray. You just won't, because you won't know who you're talking to. There's no relationship there. Now, who's this adoption for? Well, as Ryan begins to come back up and we start to respond in a minute. John 1 said it really clear. Our Father is not for everyone to say. There's an exclusive nature to that. It is for those who have received Jesus, who have believed in his name. He's given the privilege of adoption. A lot of times we say everyone's a child of God, right? Every human we're all the children of God. No, we're not. That's not a biblical concept. Everyone is created by God. There's a universal creatorhood of God, but there's not a universal fatherhood of God. To call God Father means you're saved. You belong to him. Been adopted into his family. And so, man, I want to say this very tenderly and lovingly, but very directly. Don't fool yourself today. Don't fool yourself thinking that because I grew up in church, because I recited the Lord's Prayer, because I've read the Bible and been on a mission trip, that I know God is my Father, that I'm saved. Just because you're born into that family does not mean you have yourself been adopted. And the most tragic, worst thing you can do in the Bible Belt of Christianity is to assume that God is your Father without actually ever experiencing that spirit of adoption. If you have experienced that, then man, I want to end by just exhorting us to let it shape all of our lives, y'all. To let God's fatherhood continue to permeate you, to continue to correct distorted views and to heal open wounds. I'm going to ask you the same question that God asked me this week on Monday. He started my week off in prayer asking me this. Tyler, where do you feel deprived from your dad in? What areas do you feel like your dad did not provide for you in? I'm going to ask you the same thing. Where do you feel deprived in fatherhood? What do you feel like is missing or lacking in your picture of dad? It's a very, very important question. You know what I think? I bet most of us will be able to spout it off pretty quickly without even thinking much about it. And as we sing, I want to invite you to spend time with the Lord and thinking through that. Because God wants to identify that. Why? Because he wants to heal that. He wants to replace that and begin to redeem that in your soul. Psalm 2:7 says this. I remember the day this landed in me when I read this verse. It says, "You are my son, and today I have become your father." You are my son, today I become your father. Maybe you're a believer in Jesus and God is your father, but you're not living into that fatherhood, right? You're like a newly adopted kid who's still unfamiliar with the house, who doesn't call the new dad and new mom dad and mom yet, who's still getting used to how things work. We call it shedding that orphan skin. And Psalm 2:7 shows up and he goes, hey, I've been your father. I've adopted you. You've been my son, and today you're finally getting it. Now you're calling me dad. Maybe today that's what it's like for you. Hey, I've been a Christian, but man, I haven't really been relating to God as Father. And I want him to really restore that in me and begin to permeate my life with his fatherhood. I've been his son. Today I'm going to start calling him Father. Hopefully that reality will sink in. So I want us to pray. And as we pray, man, I want us to think about how this changes the way we pray. If God is our Father, then I want to tell us a couple things really quickly and practically this changes. It means, y'all, you don't have to jump through hoops to get to him, number one. You can run straight to him. You can run straight to him. Here's what Martin Lloyd-Jones said. Grown-up people may be standing back at a distance and be very formal with some great person. You see a great person, you're like, oh, yeah, hey, great to meet you. And into that crowd who's standing back, in comes, he says, but the little child comes running in. He rushes. He holds on to his father's legs, and he has a right that no one else has. It's instinctive. He cries, Abba. Maybe for you, this means just more spontaneous prayer. Hey, Dad. Hey, Dad. Hey, Dad, little times throughout the day. I think for most of us in here, it means you can stop being worried about using perfect language. Anybody worry about saying the right thing when you're praying? Hey, guess what? You're not going to say the right thing. You're probably going to make a mistake or say something with a faulty motive. And what a beautiful way to start a prayer that's going to be at some level faulty with our Father. You don't have to worry about how you say it. Do you know my kids never qualify what they say to me? Some of you qualify every sentence you say. right? It's full of qualifiers. My kids never worry about how it's going to be interpreted and understood. Man, they belt it out. They don't hold back, right? They don't have a filter. We've got to move off of our filters with God and begin to talk to our Father the same way our kids do. If you got a 1-year-old or 2-year-old or 3-year-old, you know they speak a little gibberish, right? And then someone else comes around like, what are they speaking? Is that Elvish? I don't understand what's going on. And then you're able to decipher it perfectly because you're dad. You know what their little isms are, and you know exactly what they're saying. Hey, the Lord understands. Stop worrying about the formality and how you're saying things. Just go to him and pour your heart out to him. Church, there's freedom. There's freedom emotionally. So would you bow your heads? Let's just begin to pray and let's practice this. I want you to run straight to him right now. I want you to not worry about using the perfect language as we sing and as you think through things with him. I want you to feel total freedom emotionally. My kids cry, they're frustrated, they're sad. There's just total emotional honesty with me. Would you take off the filter with God? Would you feel the freedom to ask? My kids have no problem asking me for things that they need. They don't feel bad about it. Would you stop feeling bad asking God for things you need? Would you ask boldly? It's safe to. Are you beginning to see how perfect love swallows up fear? It's a beautiful thing. Our Father, let's come boldly. And our Father in heaven, he's not just our homeboy, but he's actually our dad. He's in charge. And so we're going to come still respectfully, yes, but we're going to come and listen. He's in charge. So we're going to climb up into his lap and just hear his voice for a little bit. And because he's our Father in heaven, it means he's totally sovereign. He has all power, and we can be confident and anticipate what he is going to do. This is our Father. Jesus tells us to not pray like the hypocrites or the Gentiles who worry about being seen and heard. And then he goes on to say the reason is because you have a Father who sees and hears. Do you know God as your Father? Let's pray. Our Father, Dad, thank you that we can talk to you about anything. We don't have to have the perfect words or everything processed emotionally before we can bring it to you. We don't have to worry about what you're going to say in response, whether you're going to hear us or want to give us good things. We can trust you. God, thank you that you have called us sons and daughters. You've bestowed on us our identity. We don't have to search for it. We don't have to grasp for it. We don't have to ask questions of who we are and why we're here anymore. You, the creator, the living God, you're our Father. Invite us intimately into your presence right now. We pray through our brother, through your Son, Jesus. Amen.